truly delighted to be once again at this annual conclave. However, I truly wish that I was here to listen rather than speak. You have gathered a most impressive group of speakers, and I would have heartily liked to hear them all. I'm very happy that this dialogue began this morning with the opening remarks of His Excellency, the former President of Iran, Mohammad Khatami. I have the highest regard for his wisdom, his scholarship, and his statesmanship. We are delighted to have him in our midst, and it is a source of great joy to me personally because it gives me an opportunity to renew our friendship. He is a great citizen of the world, a great leader of the Iranian people, and a great friend of India. It is pertinent that at a conclave like this, we recall his wise words at the UN Conference on Dialogue Among Civilizations in September 2000. It was a dialogue that he had initiated, and I recall his saying that, and I quote, "The ultimate goal of dialogue among civilizations is not dialogue in itself, but attaining empathy and compassion," unquote. I believe the ultimate goal of conferences like this should also not be that they are an end in themselves or merely commercial events, but that they help open up our hearts and minds and make us more understanding and compassionate. President Khatami concluded his address to the UN with these wise words, and I once again quote him: "In the domains of economics, politics, and culture, problems and issues rarely remain local and indigenous. We all deeply engage in making use of each other's social, cultural, and spiritual findings. The penetration of Eastern religions to the West, repercussions of Western political, cultural, and economic developments in the East, and most significantly, the expansion of global electronic communications have all rendered dialogue among civilizations a really close to home," unquote. I fully endorse these wise sentiments of our distinguished guest. Today, they have acquired renewed relevance in international affairs. We in India appreciate them more than any other people. Such a dialogue among civilizations has been the living reality for more than a millennium in this ancient and sacred land of ours. India is home to all the great religions of the world. India is home to scores of languages, hundreds of dialects, dozens of cuisines, a medley of races, colors, landscapes, and culture. The idea of India, as we all know, was shaped by this notion of unity in diversity. That's why I have often said that the success of the Indian experiment is vital to the survival of humankind as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend Arun Puri has asked me to reflect today on the theme Challenges for the Brave New World. Can India take the lead? I believe India is one of the forerunners in showing the world the way forward in dealing with one of the biggest challenges facing humankind in the modern world. This is the challenge of preventing the so-called clash of civilizations and enabling not just a dialogue between civilizations, but creating a confluence of civilizations. India is indeed a confluence of civilizations. In building an open and pluralistic society within the framework of a liberal and secular democracy, we have shown the world a way to deal with the complex heterogeneity of modern societies. Every nation must endeavor to be an open society in which the plurality of the human experience can find full and free expression. I'm not talking of majorities tolerating minorities. I'm talking of all groups, big and small, living together in harmony. In seeking to build a democratic society, the leaders of our freedom movement grappled with the challenges of a brave new world they were forced to confront. As I have often said, ours is an ancient civilization, but we are a very young nation. The survival, growth, and vibrancy of our nation has vindicated the faith of our founders in the democratic values of pluralism, liberalism, and secularism. It has enabled us to show many embattled corners of the world a practical way forward in enabling the confluence of civilization to materialize. If India has a message to the world, it is this: humankind must shun all extremes and all forms of extremism. We must reject all ideologies of exclusion, for nature's way has been to be inclusive. Nature had, of course, willed the survival of the fittest, but human societies have come to accept the idea of live and let live. Our conception of an inclusive society is based on this very principle. This is our message for the world. But it is also a message we must constantly remind ourselves of. When I see intolerance in our own functioning, when I see hatred and mutual suspicion, when I see an unwillingness to engage in constructive dialogue and debate, I wonder if we ourselves have forgotten the very principles on which our nation was conceived. Ladies and gentlemen, this conference wishes us to focus on the challenge of dealing with a brave new world. Every generation would like to believe that it is entering a brave new world. That spirit is natural and welcome. It inspires each generation to seek new horizons and find new answers to problems old and new. Many, however, will rest content reinventing the wheel and pouring old wines into new bottles. But some will strike out and truly find new pathways. A society that encourages creativity, enterprise, innovation, and risk taking will be a vibrant society, and the future belongs to such societies. Such a society will be capable of dealing with the challenges of a brave new world. I believe we must do all that is possible to allow the full expression of such human creativity and ingenuity to flourish in our country. This we can do best within the framework of an open society. But such a society will have to be a literate and educated society. It will have to be a healthy and caring society. It will have to be a knowledge empowered society, a free and egalitarian society, functioning within the parameters of the rule of law and civilized conduct and discourse. Above all, it will have to be an inclusive society. It has been our endeavor to make ours such an inclusive society. But we have a long way to go. There are, unfortunately, no shortcuts in history. The management of human affairs requires patience as well as effort, not just vision and leadership. Humanity has often been led astray by those who claimed a unique vision and offered bold leadership. We live in a highly interdependent and complex world where dialogue and patient consultation is required to deal with the challenges humanity faces today. To appreciate this and participate in an honest and constructive dialogue is the most effective way to deal with the challenges we face today. Ladies and gentlemen, I have often said, both in the context of domestic politics and international conflict, that there is no issue that cannot be resolved through dialogue and discussion. The approach of seeking an eye for an eye, as Mahatma Gandhi taught us, can only leave us all blind. Violence and force have never offered lasting solutions to human problems. This consultative and consensual approach is what has kept our diverse nation together. My friend Amartya Sen has written about the argumentative Indian, but our real strength has always been our willingness to live and let live. It is not our argumentative nature that we must celebrate, but our assimilative nature, our consensual nature, our accommodative nature. That is what has contributed to the richness of our composite culture and durability of our civilization. This is why I also believe that India can bring to the global high table, to institutions like the United Nations and its Security Council, it can bring a new approach to dealing with global challenges, whether these be challenges of environment, energy security, food security or empowerment of the underprivileged sections of society. Ladies and gentlemen, much is often made of our attitude to globalization. The organizers of this conclave have asked me to reflect on how India views the world and the processes of globalization. Let me say that I sincerely believe that we Indians have always been open to global influences and that ours will always be an open society. Even in the economic sphere, we are today as open as any free market democracy in the world. The numbers, of course, are there to tell the story. The share of foreign trade in our national income is today comparable to that of many developed market economies. But our openness is not just about these numbers. Our openness is defined by our attitudes and by our confidence in ourselves. Our media is free and open. Our popular culture has always been welcoming of outside influences. Yet, we have stood securely on our feet. As Mahatma Gandhi used to say, we have our doors and windows open to the free flow of ideas, yet we have confidence in ourselves that we will not be overwhelmed by any of them. I want more of our citizens to appreciate this reality. I am often surprised by the insular outlook of some of our political and intellectual leaders. Their narrow-mindedness betrays a lack of self-confidence in our nationhood. It is an attitude I do not associate with being Indian. We must make better use of the opportunities the world offers us. We must be more open to our own neighborhood. In a fortnight's time, we will be hosting the SAARC summit. I want India to be more open to all our neighbors. I want our neighbors to feel secure and confident that in India they have a well-wisher. We see their prosperity as a guarantee of our own prosperity. We see their progress as reinforcing our own progress, and so must they. The destiny of the people of South Asia is interlinked and interdependent. Our region must and can move forward through such a cooperative and purposeful engagement. I see a similar mutually beneficial interdependence between India and the wider neighborhood of the Indian Ocean and the Asia-Pacific regions. For centuries, our forefathers sailed westward and eastward as teachers, as traders, as merchants, and as monks. That is how we should once again approach the world at large. We must rekindle this interest in the world outside and be willing to deal with the opportunities and challenges it presents. I do believe, however, that to be able to do so with greater confidence, we must invest much more in our own capabilities. This is the real challenge before us. We need a new revolution in education. Our educational system has to be modernized, made more accessible, made more relevant to our needs and aspirations. It must equip us better to deal with an ever-changing world. science and technology today have made it possible as never before in human history that chronic poverty, ignorance, and disease do not have to be the inevitable lot of a majority of humankind. We must therefore harness the full potential offered by developments in modern science and technology. We must be able to draw on the intellectual resources of the world and also refurbish our own resources. We need world-class academic and research institutions and infrastructure. We need a more competitive industry and a more dynamic agricultural economy. Our energies must be focused on these priorities at home. We must get our act together so that we can make the best use of the opportunities presenting themselves before us. Ladies and gentlemen, I said earlier that every generation believes it is entering a brave new world. Yet one often finds that the challenges we face are, after all, not so new. Others have faced them and dealt with them. There is much we can learn from them, be it in education or healthcare, be it in building roads or better sanitation, be it in water management or conserving energy, be it in manufacturing or agriculture. There is much we can learn from those who have been here before. At the same time, there are challenges which are truly new. The challenge of addressing the ever-increasing consumption needs of billions of people. If all the developing countries of the world were to aim to a standard of living which is presently seen in the more developed countries, we need to reflect what the environmental consequences would be. Is our planet capable of sustaining a high consumption lifestyle for all its inhabitants? After all nations face a single environment, and hence the ill effects of unbridled growth would affect all nations equally. This is certainly a new challenge for which there are no ready-made answers. As a large nation, India can certainly take a lead in showing the way to the world. Ladies and gentlemen, if we need to learn from each other and tread into unknown territory, we need an open mind. I am troubled when I hear people say that India is an open society with a closed mind. That is not the India I have spoken to you about so far. The India I know and I cherish has been open to ideas from across the world. The India I know values knowledge and creativity. The India I know respects learning and scholarship. If we can approach the world and our future with that kind of self-confidence, we can regain the glory of our wondrous past. I hope your conclave and other such gatherings encourage us to be more open-minded, more willing to learn, more creative, more enterprising, and more courageous. In that lies the road to a brighter future for our children and for our grandchildren. I thank you.
You are in many ways the father of reforms in this country, and we are seeing an unprecedented growth in our economy. But if you look at it, that the economy has grown in areas which you've actually liberalized and taken away the hand of government. Telecom, civil aviation, IT industry, where in fact government had nothing to do with. So everything grew. So my question is that politicians are accountable to their electorate, businessmen are accountable to their shareholders, but I find that the bureaucracy is not accountable to anybody. And this is something in India in terms of the fact that you have rightly laid emphasis on spending money in social sectors. But where is the guarantee for outcomes? You have the outlays, but where are the outcomes? These investments in education, health, all the social sectors. That's a worrying part of the growing economy. I wonder if any action would be taken in terms of making the bureaucracy more responsive and more attuned to public needs.
Well, let me say that I do not want to claim that everything is right with our bureaucracy, but having been a bureaucrat for a large part of my life, I sincerely believe that our bureaucracy is often unnecessarily maligned. It is not that that you find dishonest, inefficient bureaucrats, but what impresses me is that despite low salaries, we have such great commitment to national goals, national ethos in our bureaucracy. Having said that, I do recognize that in a fast-changing world, we need to reflect on new ways of doing things. Outlays have to be transformed into outcomes. And it is for this reason that I had, a year ago, appointed the Administrative Reforms Commission. They are, I think, in the process of looking at our administrative system, our administrative structures, and I sincerely hope that before long we will have a blueprint for action.